Welcome to Coffee with Viking. I am Mike. Cheers. How did the disciples die? Acts 12:1 and 2. King Herod Agrippa began to persecute some believers in the church. He had the apostle James, John's brother, killed with the sword. Though the Bible records the fate of only Judas Iscariot and James, early church leaders said most of the others died as martyrs, killed for preaching about Jesus. Simon Peter, crucified at Rome with his head downward, wrote Origen, a church leader in the AD 200s. This seems to fulfill what Jesus told Peter would happen. When you are old, you will stretch out your hands. Jesus said this to let him know by what kind of death he would glorify God. John 21:18 and 19. And the reason he wanted to be crucified upside down was he knew he wasn't worthy to share the same death as Jesus did. Andrew, Peter's brother, crucified on an X-shaped cross, according to the Acts of Andrew, a book written in the AD 200s. James, son of Zebedee, the first disciple to die as a martyr, he was executed by King Herod Agrippa, probably beheaded with a sword. And that is Acts 12:2. John, Prabhu of James, died a literal death in about AD 100 at what is now Ephesus, Turkey. Philip, crucified in Turkey according to tradition. Bartholomew, skinned alive and beheaded after preaching in India according to one tradition, but the martyrdom of Bartholomew says he was stuffed in a sack and dumped in the sea. Thomas, speared to death in what is now India after starting several churches there. India's Syro-Malabar Catholic Church with 3 million members claims Thomas as its founding pastor. Matthew, martyred with an axe or a sword in Ethiopia according to the most popular of many traditions. Other stories have him being burned to death or dying on natural causes. James, son of Alphaeus, crucified in Egypt according to one tradition, in Iran according to another. Thaddeus, Judas, son of James, crucified or hacked to death with Simon the Zealot in what is now Iran according to one story. Simon the Zealot, martyred with Thaddeus in Iran according to one tradition, and another story says he was cut in two with a saw. Well, we already know Judas Iscariot hung himself, and that's in Matthew 27:5. We know that his guilt got to him, and when he tried to return the money for that he was paid for turning his back on Christ, he tried giving it back. They refused, and he hung himself. That is probably one of the most well-known deaths of any apostle in the Bible. Matthias, chosen to replace Judas Iscariot, he was stoned and beheaded According to one story, and I think I said Matthew, that's Matthias, who was chosen to replace Judas Iscariot and was stoned and beheaded. Skinned alive, this was the Apostle Bartholomew's fate, according to one legend that circulated among the early churches. The Bible reports the deaths of only 2 disciples, Judas, who committed suicide by hanging, and James, who was executed by sword. There's something else right here on this side. What is speaking in tongues? There are 2 kinds of speaking in tongues. Miraculously talking in a language the speaker hasn't learned. This happened at the Pentecost festival in Jerusalem. Jesus' disciples preached to Jewish pilgrims in the pilgrims' own language, and that's in Acts 2. In moments of spiritual ecstasy, using words that don't make sense without God's help, these are usually words praising God or delivering a message from God. Christians in the early church considered speaking in tongues as a gift from God and a sign that the Holy Spirit has filled a person. Yet the Apostle Paul called it one of the lesser Christian gifts, and he warned that it was a gift easily abused. And we see that a lot today with a lot of false teachers. And in this way, they called attention to themselves instead of to Christ. Again, we see it with a lot of false teachers. That's why many churches prohibit this practice in their worship services today. And that's why Paul insisted that no one be allowed to speak in tongues during services unless God has provided an interpreter. I speak in tongues more than any of you, Paul once wrote, but in a church meeting, I would rather speak 5 understandable words to help others than 10,000 words in an unknown language, and that is in 1 Corinthians 14, 18, and 19. So, if you're ever watching one of these preachers and they start speaking in other tongues, or they preach that you have to be saved, don't listen. Not everyone will speak in tongues. Not everyone will interpret. So, if you're actually listening to one of these ministers that keeps talking about speaking in tongues and how every real Christian will do it, they're lying. I love you all. Stay blessed. Stay caffeinated. And have a wonderful day.